Truth and Tea with the Urban Evangelist. Welcome to Truth and Tea with the Urban Evangelist.
Hi there, I'm the Urban Evangelist, and welcome to yet another exciting and fresh episode of the Truth and Tea podcast, where we filter conversations through faith. Today we're talking men these days. Although mental and emotional health affects both genders, it is oftentimes overlooked by men. It's considered a weakness if they're struggling with it, or not taken as seriously. Because of this, many men may find it quite difficult to speak up about their mental and emotional wellness, or a lack thereof. Globally, men's suicide rates are much higher than women's. According to the World Health Organization, suicide rates in men are almost twice, that's 1.8 times, as high as suicide rates in women. The same is true even here in Zambia. According to the World Population Review 2023, 12 men per 100,000 commit suicide annually, while 2.7 women per 100,000 commit suicide against this ratio. So these rates are obviously much higher among men, pointing to a real issue of mental health among men that isn't being addressed adequately. 3 John 1:2 says, "Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health just as your soul prospers." God is concerned about our souls, the housing of our thoughts, our emotions. He wants them to prosper, which means that we should be concerned too. However, men often only reach out for help when they feel they've hit rock bottom, and others don't even seek help at all. Our guest today has been speaking out and very loudly about all these issues and then some. He writes incredible articles for the Zambia National Men's Network for Gender and Development. His name is Kachepa Mtumbi. Welcome to Truth and Tea.
Thank you so much.
I'm so glad to have you.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure.
It's been a long minute.
It has, and so much has happened.
So we go far back. Do you wanna,
Yeah.
Do you wanna go back how far?
I think probably, 20 plus years?
Right, right.
I think your friends from school were sort of intersecting with my friends.
Exactly.
And then we never got to be friends like that, but we met in the professional world where I think it was through radio.
Exactly.
And good times. Yeah.
Absolutely, the good old days, as they say.
Yes.
So that was radio, that was QFM, right?
Yes, QFM,
Yes.
and then later on to Hot FM.
And I went by a very different name back in the days.
You
but
did.
Let's not get into that.
No, and I remember, I think you used to take over from my show. I think it was Saturday. I used to do a mid-morning show, and you take over at noon. So exciting times back then.
Yeah. So what's up with men these days?
Well, it's two things. Men These Days is a column that I, like you said, write for the Zambia National Men's Network for Gender and Development.
Yeah.
And their mandate is essentially to focus on how men can be more influential in their spaces with regards to positive impact. And most of the communication that we've been doing with the column that I write is around the issues that men face on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
We try to make sure that those is relatable.
Yeah.
Men that going through your average issues that then snowball into big things if they're not handled well. And we thought that's a conversation that's been missing for the longest time in media.
Yeah.
And where we are now is that men have so much to discuss, but they're not able to because of various reasons. And so Men These Days is a column that really just puts the spotlight on the different challenges that men are going through in society right now.
And I love how you're addressing these challenges. There's so many broad themes that you're tackling, with your articles. Yeah. And we will get to how people can actually access them as, the conversation evolves. Yeah. But, this is Truth and Tea. So truth, coming from obviously the biblical principles that, we live by as believers. And so there's a man in the Bible, David, who's often referred to, as someone who was after God's heart. And people think it's because of the strength that he displayed, or the bravado or this masculinity. And yet, most of it is because he was actually very expressive of his emotions. And like you, he wrote. Like we see that he wrote most of the Psalms in the Bible. Why is it that we seem to lack, these safe spaces for men to just have an outlet, someone to talk to, express their emotions, what they're thinking and feeling?
I think there's so many reasons for that. If you look at our history, this generation, my generation, is coming from what I would call dads who ruled with an iron fist in a silk glove. So it was an iron fist, but they would still massage you a little bit. But at a point, we got used to this life where the generation before us really never engaged us. It was only when they became grandfathers, for instance, when you saw the softer side of them. But men right now, I think, have got this challenge where they're the bridge, to be honest, between the traditional man and the modern man. And so on one hand, we've got traditions that value a man to speak only when he's giving advice and not when he's expressing himself, he's happy, he's sharing his goals. It's very rare for the generation that has passed for them to express themselves. And so I think most people see an expressive man as perhaps a Trojan horse. Why are you speaking? Who has sent you? You know, so for me, I speak based on my experience and the research I've done for the column, men are not comfortable speaking because of the backlash they've had in the past. When you express your feelings, it's seen as, well, this is an effeminate thing to do. Men do not express themselves. And it's now weaved itself into this situation where men can't speak at all. Even when they're positive about the things they want to talk about, they'll be like, well, don't share this, internalize it. So we've been limited to only speaking when we're supposed to dispense advice, when we're speaking in the boardroom, when we are perhaps angry. But it's very few men who actually speak when they're happy. If you've noticed that, very few men express how happy they are. Even from a positive perspective, it seems like there's always been limitations. So men are in a state where they're always being questioned as to why they're expressing themselves. And that, I think, is where the challenge is right now.
Do you believe that, you know, there's room somewhere to strike a fine balance between expressing yourself in a way that still, you know, upholds the authoritarian component, while at the same time allowing for the soft side, if I may call it that, of men to just emerge? Are men allowed to be soft?
I think they are, but only when the occasion calls for it. But a man being soft through and through is almost unacceptable. Like, why are you taking your daughters to a pampering session? You're supposed to be strong, you're supposed to be tough, because that's showing your weak side. But I think there's a balance that has to be struck. And I'll share this because most of us tend to look at it as only based on the home situation. But even in the workplace, men only come out strong. But there's room for you to be empathetic as a man. Because if you're speaking to another man and he's telling you how he's struggling with his work, he expects you to understand. But there's always that barrier that we've put up and saying that, listen, just do the work. There's no sense of, okay, let me put my brother aside and let's have a chat about it. Is it family? Is it finances? Is it health? What's going on? So I think you can strike a fine balance, but society, in the way it works, expects you to be tougher first and softer. I'll give you an example of a man whom every other day he's tough on his family, he's tough on his wife, he's uncompromising. The day he says, you look beautiful.
It'll be shocking.
It's shocking. The whole world just says, so there's that side to you.
Who are you and what have you done to this man?
Exactly. But if a man is always engaging, he's always dishing out compliments to his kids and his wife, the day he decides to say, can you stop that? It doesn't feel like it's got the same authority or impact as when he's tough and then he's soft. So those are the challenges that we have as men, because we have to strike that balance where authority is also seen as something that can be soft. It doesn't always have to be strong and you know, pumping your fist. And so I think there is a balance that can be struck.
Okay. Speaking of that balance, I mean, for women, we love to talk. We can talk, well, you know that. We can talk all day, and we arrange for, you know, meetups just to talk. I need to talk, you know, let's meet. And it may not happen, you know, as frequently or as regularly as it does for the men folk, you know. So when you meet as men, what do you talk about then? Because you're meeting and you're talking, right? But is there any space in there for real, like, meaty conversations that just go below sport and whatever else might, you know,
I think
pick your interests?
most of us have friendships that are tiered as men.
Okay.
So there's the men who you hang out with and you talk about your everyday things.
Yeah.
My boss, work, business, career. Do you know a mechanic who can fix this because mine has messed this up?
Yeah.
The engine doesn't run anymore. So that's that level. It's your everyday conversation. And then it comes down to a little bit of depth. No, my child wasn't well, so I had to run around and take the kid to the hospital. That group doesn't get to hear this.
So as you're going with the tiers, I'll be interrupting just to get
That's
a bit more
fine.
understanding.
Yeah.
Who do you call when your children are unwell?
I call my wife, but
Okay.
but among the men,
Right.
It's very rare that I call a friend.
Okay,
Because you sort of, as a man, you've developed this system where you're the first solution to everything.
I see.
But if you're not able to do it, usually you don't call the first tier. You call the third tier, not even the second, but the third tier.
third.
The third tier is the guy who will probably say, listen, I'm coming. You don't need to drive. I don't think you're in the state to drive if your child isn't well. So I'm coming through, I'm picking you guys up, and I'm taking you to the hospital. So we're tiered in the way we do this. And then the guy who's in the third tier probably doesn't even see you as often, if we're being very honest.
Really, yeah.
It's the guys who you're casual with, who you relax with, who you tend to see more often. Because I think we tend to decompress as men without needing to talk about our pressures.
I see.
We just want to switch off a little bit, watch football, listen to good music, and discuss literally everything that isn't as important as maybe family, health, finances.
Would you call that avoidance then? The choosing not to speak about it?
I think to an extent it could be called avoidance, but it also depends on who is willing to take the leap in the different tiers of friends that you have. I mean, other men probably have like 1 or 2 tiers. But I've noticed that every other man has different friends for different reasons. And avoidance maybe comes in from a fear of, if I say this, where else will I hear it?
Yeah.
There's the sense that...
Do you have mulomo amongst men?
Oh, we do.
Really?
We do. It's very subtle.
Because that's what we complain about,
No, but
amongst women.
It's very subtle, and it's not where somebody pulls you aside and say, did you hear about Joe or James? It's more of things are rough in Lusaka, just like James. So it's not necessarily the focal point, but it's almost like a generalization and to say, well, it's also affecting another man. But gossiping, maybe not in my circle.
Okay, all right. And then just before I let the whole tiered, circle go, would the third tier be comprised of people that you've come a long way with? Childhood friendships, people that you've probably established a greater level of trust with?
It would. And in that tier as well is also maybe your brother, your cousin, your uncle, because you know that these are people who know you well, as opposed to the guys who you met through maybe networking, who only know the professional side of you or the version of you that's been referred to by other people. But in the third tier is where I think you're most comfortable. And unfortunately, we don't nurture enough of that third tier, where we're willing to be deliberate to say, hey, big bro or young bro, let's go for lunch.
Yeah.
It almost happens by accident when you actually hang out with the third tier and offload. And it could be at a funeral, it could be at a wedding. It's very rare that you're deliberate to say, let's meet up every other Friday to talk about life. It's very rare.
Where does the wife fall?
I think it's very difficult to place a wife in a tier, to be honest, because she fits into all those. If you really have a great relationship with her, you can gossip with your wife.
Yeah, good answer.
You can talk finances with your wife. You can hang out with her, and she'll also be able to tell you what maybe the first tier will tell you. They'll be very straightforward with you. Like, don't do this. It won't work. But I think a wife is multi-tiered. Yeah.
Fully agree. Because I gossip a lot with my husband, just so you know.
I think we all do. I think every healthy marriage or relationship has a lot of gossip. And the gossip isn't, most of the time, if you notice, it's so well-intentioned, if there's such a thing as well-intentioned gossip. You engage with each other on a level where you feel, this is how we connect. We're not necessarily speaking about other people, we're speaking of other people.
Agreed.
how can we do better? How can we not make the same mistakes? Or how can we learn from them? So basically, that's how I see gossip between a partner and a man and a woman.
Okay. You mentioned, you see that the third tier at weddings, funerals, and you wrote a very interesting articles on what the role of men these days is at weddings, at funerals, with some references to uncle, malume, vayama.
Exactly.
What is their role really with such, gatherings and events, and just, I guess, in society?
I think that conversation or that article came from an event that I was attending, and I noticed that there was a lot of young men, and the old men were sitting in a corner, and the young men were mingling and, having fun.
Okay.
And I was thinking...
Wedding or funeral?
That was actually Chilangamulilo.
Okay.
And when the food came,
yeah.
Yeah. But there was no sense of occasion from the young men to observe and learn and see what's going on. And you get the sense that young men are now more detached from their roles as custodians of culture and tradition because they feel, listen, we've still got elders who are going to sort this out.
Yeah.
But, I mean, look at you and I. 20 years ago, time has moved so fast.
Yeah.
So we're no longer going to be the people who are going to be asked to go and get ice. We're now going to be asked what to do.
Right.
And so I tend to think Bayama, Malume, those are the roles that we now need to start stepping into as men, because there's a generation that's coming that is looking out and thinking, I can't Google this. So where are they going to get that information?
Yeah.
We've got the privilege of asking our grandparents, asking our fathers and uncles about this information. But the generation that comes after us, if we don't, become strong custodians of this information, the young ones will probably lose it.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I'm not sure we'll have a generation of Ashivo Kombe nowers who are really capable of, sharing the information and the wisdom, because we're not plugged into that culture. Yeah, we're so detached because we've got other things to do. So many things to do, and yet the important things are not what we're doing.
Yeah. Reminds me of a conversation I had just earlier in the week, dealing with the illness of an elderly family member. And you realize that, like you said, you're being called upon now to be part of the decision-making process. Or like you realize that, we are actually the adults now in this situation. We are the grown-ups.
Yeah, very true.
Is a good job being done, at bridging the gap? I know you mentioned that, yes, there's this separation because there's no realization yet, or if at all it's there, no one's really stepping up to it, to be deliberate about what can I learn from the malumes and the grandfathers there. What can we do to just help bridge that gap better? Because I feel like even on the flip side, where women are concerned, this is something that we definitely can do better.
And yet we feel women have it together more than men.
I think we just ease into it, really?
Yeah, I would say so. Because with men, the heavy lifting was done by the previous generation. They sat with the elders. They were brutal. They were brutal in being given information. They were told, listen, you do not do this. And then they had to then get this information and then take it to the next level. Our generation has to do a lot of heavy lifting as well. We need to be able to say, listen, I know I may not look like the type of person who needs to know these things, but I'm going to sit with you and I'm going to understand what needs to be done. If a man is coming of age or a boy is coming of age, what needs to be done? What happens? And you can't say your cousin from Mwinilunga or Sesheke will come and do it for you. It doesn't work that way because the guy in Mwinilunga and Sesheke is probably in the city already. Or if he's there, he's preoccupied with other interests that may not be what used to be back then. So you really have to make that effort. And as a man, I think you have to understand that these roles play an important part in preserving not just culture, but also the mental health of our men. Because when you face challenges, who are you going to run to apart from an uncle? Before, you might be a little bit skeptical of going to a friend or even your own father. But your uncle is supposed to be that buffer. to the different issues that you're going through.
Yeah.
And if you're not a malume or a shivukombe or whichever role is out there to play, you might find that all you do is hang out with your nephews, hang out with the young generation, and there's really no value.
Yeah.
I did say in the column that uncles are most likely to buy a platter and drinks because they like one of one of your friends. Why? Is because they've decided to step down to your level as a youngster. They still want to be trendy, but there's also a limit to what you can do.
Course.
You know, you also need to be able to be the bridge.
Yeah.
And I think we're not bridging it enough. We need to be able to say, well, our foot is in this new generation. Can also learn from the one that's gone before us.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it actually circles back to the third tier where you said we meet probably only at events or family gatherings as opposed to being intentional about outside those spaces. You know, what is there to glean from the ones that have gone ahead of us? There's definitely a link as well, at least an easy enough inroad to, you know, cementing these extended family relationships.
I agree, and you don't need to stay in a mud hut for 3 months for you to understand. No, it's a gentle process of understanding at the last wedding what happened when a Soli married a Lenje, or a Tonga married a Zimbabwean woman, a Shona man. Like, you need to know how to navigate these things. Because 30 years from now, 70s, 80s, 60s, your child comes and they say they're marrying from a tribe that you don't have any idea what the traditions are. What are you going to do? You need to dip into some of the knowledge that you had and see how you can adapt it for your current situation. But if you're not, you find yourselves in a situation where you're just winging it. And winging it tends to actually have a lot of ramifications, I've noticed.
Right.
So I would say plug in if you can as a man. Whatever opportunity you get to glean information from the elders, do it. Don't be shy about it. Okay. And I think they'll be happy to give you that
Absolutely.
information.
Absolutely. I fully agree there. You said something interesting. I laughed, but it's not funny. It does happen where an uncle, an elderly person decides to step into your age group because they're interested in perhaps one of your friends, right? And I feel like that's, again, another perception about men is that they tend to cover up for each other. Like, imagine that actually goes through. You meet with your uncle, he's interested in your friend, and perhaps a relationship, a very inappropriate one, ensues. And then now you become part of that cover up. And it's often said that men are very good at covering up for each other and bad at calling each other out on things that really matter, like, are you being a present father? Are you building your family? You know, how are you doing, you know, in your career? Are you building yourself up? And, you know, just to tie it into the nature of the conversation and rather the nature of the podcast, the Bible speaks very strongly about, you know, suppressing the truth in unrighteousness. What do you have to say about that?
I think it all comes back to your relationships as men. If there are no boundaries, anything goes, right? So if your uncle hangs out with you, he goes clubbing with you, when he comes to visit you at your boarding house or university, it's not really to see you. Because it's a gateway for him to see maybe his girlfriend. Once you don't have that respectful relationship where he's that custodian for you, anything goes. So I think men also don't have boundaries, and there's this sense that, listen, you're my guy, it's okay, I'll just turn a blind eye to this. But that then also begins to affect you as an individual, because for the longest time, I think in business, in relationships, in sport, there's always these small communities that we make within ourselves as men, because we sit and say, oh, those guys, they love their wives, so they're not cool to hang out with because they'll be leaving by 17 hours. So I think I'll hang out here. And then there's also guys who say, those guys party too much, so I think I'm going to hang out here where I think I'm going to hang out with the married men. So we then filter into different groups. And I tend to think when accountability is not being, you know, persuaded among our friends, it's only because we've chosen that we're not going to be accountable with our friends. So an example I can give you is you're a married man whose 5 friends are all single. Who's going to hold who accountable there? So you choose where you find your accountability are found. And most of us take the easy way out. And that's why I say it's hard work as a man, because hard work is not necessarily the work of lifting logs because you didn't study in university.
Yeah.
Hard work is choosing to say, today the guys say, let's party. We've got, like a whole budget for this. We might even go on till midnight because we're old. It is like really late. But you come to a point where you decide to say, well, do I want this or not? And it circles back to who you've chosen to associate with.
Right.
And that for me is where the sticking point is for most of us. You can only be accountable for a group that you've chosen is going to hold you accountable. Yeah.
I like that you've actually emphasized that is hard work for a man.
It is.
Because, from a woman's perspective, and probably a lot of women, feel that way, it's almost as if it's a no-brainer, like, why stay out that late, or why are you succumbing to peer pressure at your age?
Yeah.
Because the guys were staying out late and I opted to stay out late. But I think it gives a sense of appreciation for the fact that what might seem very simple to us, in your definition, is that's the hard work. That is a man putting in the work.
Yeah, I think a lot of us don't, we don't sit here and say, my wife does this, let me tick a box.
Yeah.
But with women, there's certain things that you look at and you question to say, well, where's this new guy coming from? He used to be home at this time. He would do these things.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, it seems like everything has gone haywire.
Yeah.
The radar, you can't figure out what's going on.
Right.
And it's only because accountability has shifted in his group, and most likely because he has shifted his group. Most of us know which friends are not going to tolerate certain behaviors. And when we know we don't want to be held accountable, we sort of put people in different silos and say, if I want to pursue this sort of activity or this sort of business, this individual is not going to go for it.
Yeah.
So at the back of our minds, we know what's wrong and what's right, but we only go to certain friends and groups when we know they're going to enable what we want to do. That's one thing I've noticed.
That's very insightful, which leads me to my next question. Should a man have structures of accountability? If I were to ask you, what 3 types of people should every man have just to reinforce accountability, what would that look like for you?
It's very difficult to identify the different people, but you do know as an individual what your responsibilities would be. I mean, if you're the head of a household and you've got a family, then you know that you need to plug into somebody who's going to be able to tell you that this path you've taken, I think realign and come back. But generally,
and would that be like someone older than you?
Sometimes it's somebody within your own age group, and not because they know better, but because they know that this pathway you're taking, it's just not going to be feasible in the long run. I think there's bad news coming, and that can come from even a younger person. Why? Because you've got that relationship where they're looking up to you. So accountability may come from the most surprising places sometimes, because you've got this nephew or this cousin or this boy who you're mentoring, who will be surprised to meet you in a certain location and says, what are you doing here? And if that doesn't trigger something in you, then you realize, then I don't think you understand that you're a mentor, somebody's looking up to you. So there's always this saying, there's the personal you, the private you, and the public you. And I think the public is where different mentors come in. And these could be business mentors, career, and then there's the private. And in private is where it's away from everyone, but still incorporating people who are able to talk to you about, maybe it could be your marriage, it could be your finances, it could be your health. And then I think the personal is where now it's one-on-one. You know somebody who you can go to, you can call in the middle of the night and say, listen, this is my struggle. How do I navigate this? So I think it's about people who you relate to in a public level, private level, and personal level.
Okay. I'm still referring back to your articles, because it was my guilty pleasure literally the last couple of days, just reading and getting insight. And there's one where you talk about men running bottling plants. because of all the bottling in that they do. And it was a very interesting heading. I think something to do with you've put yourself in a bottle. But then you're like, no, we actually do that to ourselves, you know, either by bottling things up or, I forget, taking to the bottle, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah, so we've got relationships with the bottle, like either we're being bottled by a woman or we're drinking because of the bottle, or we're bottling things.
Yeah.
And I think the most important thing there is the other two things. One is speculation. The second is in your control, outright control. But the third one, you may not be aware you're doing it. And you start internalizing so many things, but by the time you realize just how much you're carrying, it's too late.
Yeah.
Because then the impact is, it's financial, it's marital, it's even just health-wise.
Right.
I can give you an example of something that may not look like it's harmful, but you could be feeling a little bit of maybe a backache pain, or a headache that just won't go away. And every other day, you simply say, well, listen, I'll take water, I'll take medication. You just don't want to go to the hospital, get a professional to ask you, or rather to help you. Most of us tend to bottle even just the smallest things. And you could discover that headache is probably a result of something bigger. And with time, you then come to the realization that you could have fixed this way back. Maybe it could have been a year ago when this issue started. So bottling doesn't necessarily always have to be for the big things. Even the smallest things. You may be having, as they would say, more month at the end of your money. You don't know how to navigate your money because every time you have money, it's going in the wrong places.
Right.
And you're bottling it. You don't want to accept that you're spending carelessly, for instance. And after maybe a while, you realize you are not able to sustain yourself financially. So I think men need to be able to take a step back sometimes. I know we like to be very busy. We don't like to sit, but take a moment and look at what it is that you're not talking about, what it is that you're not, addressing, because eventually it does bubble up, and usually it's not easy to contain at that point.
At that point. You have very interesting views on how a man can decompress. And again, back to one of your articles, I actually saw a meme, going around on social media at some point where it was talking about how men will get home and then spend time in their cars. And the running joke is that they're deleting, messages or communication with a side chick or girlfriend. But you brought in a whole different take to that, actually. Would you care to explain to that person that's watching this and listening in right now?
Yeah, I always think, and this is my experience with everybody that's, friends, cousins, relatives. Most times when you're going through a moment where you feel, I need to transition between work and family, or family and work, you just can't switch on and switch off. And I feel men are always seen as being sneaky when they've got time on their own. Because what could you be doing as a man on your phone, sitting in the car? You can't be praying, obviously. I mean, you must be deleting messages.
Wow.
But there's a process that a man tends to develop over time. And it's routine for him to be able to say, I'm not going to leave home at least until I've done A, B, C, D, E, or I'm not going to sleep in this home before I've done this. And one routine I have is to make sure, for instance, home, all the doors are locked, the security lights are on, everything is put away that might be dangerous. Those are the things that you do. But it's seen as something suspicious if a man sits in his car, he drives in, sits in his car, and he's on his phone. He could be on his phone typing a note, journaling. Today my day was great, and how I could have done better was this, and I'm committing to improving myself this way. But men are also guilty. And I'm not saying this is just unique to one or the other guy who might have read that column, but men are also guilty of sitting in a car and deleting messages. We're not going to hide from that fact. But the positive aspect of sitting in your car and decompressing is it means you're not bringing your work home. work is a stressful environment.
Right.
No matter what you do,
Right.
whether you're a bus driver, a miner, or a president,
Right.
it's stressful. And
Yeah.
you cannot bring that energy home because people only know you as dad or hubby or son.
Yeah.
You could be the biggest rock star in the world, but when you come home, you're somebody's son.
Yeah.
So give them that. They expect that when you come home. You're not going to, I think, you're not being fair if you bring your work home, but also you're not being fair when you bring your home to the office. That's where I think now you start struggling as a man because you haven't been able to separate your different roles as a man. And I'd say decompressing is very, very important.
Yeah.
Some do it at the bar, others do it in the gym, some take a walk, but it's very important for you to be able to take a step back and say, okay, this is here and this is me as a dad. And I think there's also need to decompress. Sometimes we forget, we band everybody in the home. We talk to our wives as if we're the dad to the kids.
Yeah.
Even that needs to be separated sometimes. You need to be able to identify this conversation is for my wife, this conversation is for the kids, this is for my mom. And you just can't transition without being able to take a step back and say, well,
Yeah.
I think I was angry at what my boss did, but I cannot bring that anger to my kids.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't even know what KPIs are. So
Exactly. I just love, though, how you've, brought a whole positive reinforcement to the fact that we can't treat, first of all, just you saying, like, what could a man possibly be doing on his own? You know what I mean? And it does hit home because we shouldn't treat a man's alone time with suspicion or like a naughty child that, when my kids go quiet in the house, that they are definitely up to something and usually it's no good.
that's true.
But I just like how you've really highlighted that, because we do recharge sometimes from just getting away from people. In scripture, we see that Jesus would always, get away from the crowds to be on his own.
Exactly.
He would decompress that way. And I think there just is need for us to allow for that.
Yeah.
And just let a man be sometimes,
I agree.
in solitude. It's like you said, like you honestly think a man can be alone to just pray? Why not? If you can do it, why can't he?
And you find that reflection helps.
Yeah.
As a man,
for
being
sure.
able to see where you're at, how far you've come. Because if you're always switched on, what time are you going to sit back and say, am I doing right by my family? Am I putting in the right hours at work? Because I think there's this tendency to believe we're machines.
Yeah.
But the truth is, on occasion, we will break down.
Yeah.
And not because things have gone wrong, but we'll break down because the load is quite a lot.
Right.
And it's important to be able to be given space where you can take a walk and your family won't say, can we come with you? It's because they know you're better for it. When you come back, your mind is clearer, you're a bit more at peace, and you can engage them.
Right.
I think you should be able to allow a man to be able to say, listen, today is my day. And I'm lucky that I have that as a man because I've got daughters, and so my house is...
How many?
2 daughters, so
Lovely.
my house there's a different dynamic.
Yeah.
So when I ask for a day to say, listen, guys, I need this, they understand. So it's important that we reinforce these opportunities for men to be able to sort of refocus and present themselves as the best version of themselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
Speaking of refocus, how can a man bet on himself? And why is that important? And what is betting on yourself as a man, anyways?
Nobody will bet on you, generally. I think the world is a bit brutal for men. And if you notice, men have retreated a lot from different roles in society because a lot of us feel we're not being, I don't think the word is validated, but we're not being seen. It feels like there's no incentive for being a good man these days. The incentive used to be if you're a good man, then you'll be able to have a stronger role in society because people say, I think, you know what, KwaZulu from that house, out of all these, is somebody we can pick on and say, listen, there are boys who are being a problem in the community. Can you speak with them? But there's no incentive for the man who demonstrates that he's committed to community, he's got values that make a difference in his home or even in his workplace. There's really no incentive. So to your point, I think betting on yourself is really not for people's validation. It's really about you. Are you in a good space? Are you able to provide for your family, not just financially, but mentally as well, emotionally, spiritually? Because it's a long process of betting on yourself. It's first dealing with the insecurities of, am I doing enough for my family? Am I where I should be as a man? But how you bet on yourself is by drowning out the noise. And the noise tends to be from different conversations. We know so much about each other these days on social media.
True.
You're struggling financially and you're seeing people posting their holidays, or they just went to watch a football match in England, and you basically don't even have enough to put a meal on the table for your family. It's very difficult for you to bet on yourself in that situation, because you're thinking, this is the gap that I have. I don't even have, the luxury of doing this. So betting yourself is a very, very long journey of drowning out the noise, identifying exactly what you should be doing for yourself. You cannot do for others before you do for yourself, I believe. And even within our circle of friends, there's always going to be people who will want a version of you that is not ready. I've noticed, because it comes back to hard work. It's hard work for you to wake up and say, I'm still going to keep going, despite all these challenges. That for me is betting on yourself, because you know that if I stop, then I'm out. So you have to keep going. And I think betting on yourself is exactly that. You have to keep going. And the challenge I think most men face now is that, see, prehistoric man didn't even know what he looked like.
Exactly.
But he still went and hunted. Today we're looking at how we appear to people, pushing a wheelbarrow to feed our families. And that, I think, is where we've lost it as men. We're so fixated on how it looks and not how it impacts the family, how it impacts your mental well-being. So I think betting on yourself is drowning out the noise and saying, this is my focus, this is my goal, and these are the people I'm doing this for.
I like how you use that analogy also to just highlight that, we're plagued with betting companies, and you emphasize that it may look like it's not such a big deal until you begin to see it pop up, in your life decisions.
I think everything is microwaved now, right? You want something, if you want to have a meal and you're home, you just order on your phone and it arrives. That's how simple it is. Before, you'd actually have to go and look for the ingredients and cook. And wait for the food to get ready, to be prepared. But now all you do is just click of a button and it arrives. So when everything seems so easy, it's very hard for you to make decisions that are difficult. And so you do get a sense that we want the easy way out as men. And I think even just in general as humans. But as a man, when you start seeing how easy it is to get money from betting and you get maybe 1,000 kwacha, you tend to think, well, this should also be easy for me to get a job. Why am I finding it difficult to get a job? But then if you start applying that sense of urgency to things that don't really matter, you want the same for things that matter. And things that matter don't take, they take time.
They take time,
You will think that easy cash, easy relationships, everything should be easy. But when the chips are down and you realize things are hard, is when you actually realize that, wait a minute, you mean I have to wake up every day to do this? You mean 1,000 kwacha literally is something that I need to work for as opposed to gambling? So the penny drops very, very, very loudly when you realize that life isn't as simple as winning money overnight. you think relationships should have a turnaround time. You meet someone tomorrow, you know them well.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that. And when you start applying this microwaved approach to everything, you tend to miss, I think, what's valuable. Everything just comes easy, and everything also just goes easy as well.
Yeah. Easy come, easy go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You said there's no incentive these days for being a good man.
No, there isn't.
Do you think masculinity has become toxic?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think masculinity has never been toxic. People might argue with it, but I think aspects of masculinity have been toxic. And there's so much unlearning that we need to do as men and women on what is toxic and what's not. You see, a man will come home and go straight to his bedroom. Daddy is like, no. How's your day? He doesn't answer his wife. That's toxic masculinity, you would think.
Yeah.
But is it really? Is it because he's been raised that way? Or is it because he's handling things that he doesn't know how to navigate? So sometimes we look at toxic masculinity as a byproduct of being a man. But toxic masculinity is a byproduct of failing to manage a situation. Because, give me an example of toxic masculinity in modern day Zambia, for instance. It could be a man who decides that for you to get this job, I need a favor from you as a woman. And you look at it from that perspective and say, yes, this is toxic.
Yeah.
But it's coming from a place where, one, he's got no accountability in his circle.
Yeah.
Two, he doesn't decompress. It's because he feels everything should be fast. So it stems from failing to address issues before they happen. So toxic masculinity is not on purpose. A lot of people might think, yes, that's how we're wired, but we're not wired that way. It happens because we haven't dealt with the issues that are bubbling. And you see the worst of people, and then you realize, oh, that's how men are. But no, that's how that man is, because he hasn't talked to his uncle about his problem with women. He hasn't talked about how he is coping with a lack of finances. And so what's he going to do? He's going to cope by expressing himself negatively. And I have to say that when writing these articles, I just don't research. I've actually sat down with the Zambia National Men's Network for Gender and Development and heard case studies of where men come from when they're toxic. It's all because something is bubbling that they haven't dealt with. And you will notice how men have retreated because a lot of them are afraid of expressing themselves because it will be perceived as toxic. Because if I step out and say this to my wife or my co-worker, it's toxic. But the reality is, I'm just trying to express myself, but I just don't know how. So toxic masculinity does exist, but it only stems from failing to address the real issues that men are going through.
I see. Very enlightening how you've put it across. So it sounds to me that if a person, if who a person is as a boy will, hugely determine the outcome of who they become as a man, then it means part of manning up has a lot to do with your process, right? Your life experiences, how you were raised, the kind of home you grew up in, really. It sounds to me also that there's then a huge need for how are boys being mentored? Back to earlier on when you said there's, a gap between the elderly men and the younger ones. What, again, back to the question of what are some of the things that men can do to pour themselves out into the younger ones?
I think I'll give you an example, and I think it's better to dive in from what you've experienced as a person. My dad is an example of a man who I can only improve on. Like, you can't go any further below, because he's set a standard to say, listen, this is where I expect you to be, so you need to go above this. And
And does that go both ways? Sorry to interrupt, because I might lose the train of thought. Does that go both ways if your father wasn't a good man and he didn't set a standard? Like, do you still work to improve yourself?
It's difficult for me to say because I grew up in a house where I saw what can be done right.
Okay.
But it's not as if we don't make mistakes. But when somebody is deliberate in saying, this is what I expect, you tend to latch onto that more. And that's not what we're doing with young boys because they're meeting us on the dance floor. What are you going to tell them that's different from what they see? An example I can give you is we haven't identified places where boys and young men are comfortable. Because there's no way you're going to get a boy from a club and tell him, listen, you need to do this to make it right in your life. But look for boys where, or men, where they feel the most comfortable. And I'll be very honest, maybe it's age catching up, but I don't think most of us are comfortable when we're pretending to be happy. I mean, get boys where they are most vulnerable. And vulnerability comes from funerals, weddings, family occasions. If we don't seize the opportunity to reach them where they are willing to listen to us, then I don't think we will. So pouring into kids is not just about dispensing advice, but also leading by example. So if we're at a funeral and we're not doing what is expected of us as men, they're not going to be open to being poured into to say, listen, this is how you do it. One thing about young boys these days is they can get information anywhere. So even if you come in with this, advice, they already know what you're going to tell them. It's just up to them to choose whether it makes sense or not. But who's telling them that advice? Are you leading by example? Are you credible as a person who's going to dispense that advice? So in my view, mentorship is the one aspect that still needs to be reinforced. We used to see mentorship in school as boys as a head boy. When you come in, or prefects, they'll tell you you're late, this is how you do it. There was a structure. But to this new way of living where even the head boy wants to be cool, even the boss in your workplace wants to be part of the trendy kids, you need to be able to detach and say, I think this is where I think I have value based on the information or knowledge that I have before you. So I would say lead by example, but seize every opportunity where you see men are vulnerable. And that I think is family occasions and different platforms, which I think you need to now start nurturing. Golf. It could be watching football. It shouldn't be a sit down to say, okay, now young man, let's talk about how you're failing to manage your marriage. No. It has to be opportunities that you can pick out that are not usually available.
All right. In a nutshell, just to nicely package this very rich conversation, men these days, what can they do better, to just manage their wellness mentally, spiritually, emotionally? What can men these days do? If you could just look into that camera and just, speak to, as they say, speak to your fellow gender.
Wow, it's very difficult. I thought I've been speaking to men and
you actually have. No, but you've been speaking to both, really.
I genuinely
I've picked up quite a lot.
And I think it's important that I think women have a say because we're not doing this on our own.
Right.
But I think men need to come to a point where we are expressing ourselves a bit more carefully. We have always been wild about saying whatever we want to say, but we do make an impact in the things that we say and do. And as a man, your role is not limited to finances. There's an opportunity for you to be a source of wisdom, a source of advice based on the mistakes you've made and the successes you've had. I believe there's no room for error when you come as a man, and that's how we've been told. You can't make mistakes, but feel free to try new things, express yourself. But the biggest challenge, I think, will be when you hold back those mistakes and not express yourself. Release the tension, share with your friend. It could be an uncle, it could be a sister. women do play a role as well. I think women play a role in the way we engage, and it doesn't always have to be men these days being always about a relationship among men. I think we can also engage women in a positive way. We can learn from women. We can also engage them in a way that gives us insight that maybe we may not be able to get from our fellow men. So I'm encouraging you to go out there, have fun with life, but also see what value you add to your community. And I think that's what I have to say.
Very well said. Nicely condensed. I have absolutely nothing to add to that.
I absolutely love what you do, and I think there's also an opportunity for us to learn as men. The aspects that we need to improve on spirituality as well are things that men tend to think it's for later in life.
Yeah.
No, I think try and get in now and learn and sort of realign your life in ways that I think could be much, much more valuable for a richer life as you age.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you for getting that in as well. It's very important. I mean, it's at the heart of everything that we do. And I'm glad that you've brought it to the fore so nicely, because really it all hinges on that. What is at the center of your life. And try God, men. That's my advice, actually. Try Jesus, and watch it all fall into place together. Kachepa, as we used to call you.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being here.
For coming on the show. It's been most enlightening, most interesting, and I've learned quite a lot. I keep saying that, but every time you spoke, I would tie it into something.
It's been a pleasure, and I think I enjoyed it because it's allowed me to speak, and I think there's a lot of joy in speaking, being able to communicate. So I think I have you to thank more than you have to thank me.
And I wish you all the best in your writing adventures as an author.
Thank you so much.
I can't wait to get my hands on those projects you're working on.
Yes.
You can definitely count me in. Please, if there's any signing ceremony somewhere, give me a shout and I'll be there.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Mansa.
All right. So that's been it on Men These Days. Don't forget to tune in, and also do not forget to subscribe to Radio Christian Voice and the Urban Evangelist YouTube channels so that you can keep up to date with the latest notifications. So like and subscribe. And it's been Truth and Tea, as always, filtered through faith.